Hello, hello, hello. Okay, so today we're going to discuss. First of all, today is a charity stream, so if you get the chance, please check out the links in the description below. There's links to charitable organizations such as the Audubon Society that helps out with the birds, and the Ark, which helps out with saving marine life, um, mostly on rehabilitation. But, anyways, um, so we're doing a stream today. We're going to be discussing a bit of lore. Not real lore, lore crafting. Not lore craft, not lore croft, lore crafting. So, one thing that we can, one idea that one might have while playing Fallout 76 is you'll notice there's certain loot dropped by certain enemy NPCs. And we know from the last closest game to this game, Fallout 4, that humans and robots are interchangeable. So you can make a synth from a robot, and you can make a robot from a human. We also get a little bit of that in Fallout New Vegas with the Robo Brains. So Robo Brains are robots made from humans. So you can get, and lobotomites are synth-like creatures made from humans. So you can make a human into a synth. You can make a synth into a robot, assumably. You can make a robot into a synth. Anyways, now that we got that out of the way, we'll discuss an idea that I've been having recently. I'm sure it's nothing new. If you play these games a lot, you may have thought of this idea as well. So, anyways, I'm going and I'm killing a bunch of super mutants, and I notice robo armor is something that you get from killing super mutants. And I've moved down here towards Nuka World on Tour because it's free to fast travel to. And I'm fighting these guys over at Widow's Perch. And I'm fighting these guys over at Rollins Labor Camp. And I'm noticing these humans, these raiders, they got robot bodies all over the place. Mostly the chest chassis piece, very similar to what robo armor is made of. And I'm thinking to myself, what if the robo armor was made by the raiders and it's what they donned next that we don't get to see on screen? So, anyways, the way the play goes is humans. Oh, by the way, when you kill these raiders, you don't get robo armor. You get combat armor, which is assumably like the world government before the war. So, anyways, from what this story tells us visually, now once again, this is lore crafting, nothing concrete, just spinning off what we see. So, what this tells us, what it could tell us, a possible explanation for all this could be that there was a people's army that's goal was to improve humanity, and these men were given work through the people's army. That singular star that's on the combat armor represents the unified singularity, a great cause for mankind to work and strive towards. But what happens is at some point, instead of conscripting men to do the work, robots are manufactured specifically for specific jobs. So now there's men out of work. So these men are ticked off. They get together and they start kidnapping robots and chopping them up into bits. At some point, they start wearing these robots as armor, very similar to Morrowind. So in Morrowind, there's some visual storytelling. The guards of some of the cities wear chitin armor, assumably made from Landrug's crabmen. And assumably, these crabmen uh, were the predecessors to those cities. So these cities were built by these crab people, and these dark elves, these imperial guards or whatever in Morrowind, end up wearing the flesh of the previous people who lived in that city and become guards. So what we kind of see is a reimagining of that in Fallout 76, where it's very possible that these raiders that once upheld society now wear the robots that came to replace them and somehow try to uphold society for a while. But at some point they become super mutants, because if you take a look at that robot armor, it's very similar to the metal armor that you can wear and the metal armor that you find super mutants wearing. So it's very possible that at some point these noble crusaders, whose goal was to take revenge upon the robots, lost their cause and devolved into very primitive super mutants that's only goal is uh, violence. Okay, so that's one part of this equation. Next, what comes doesn't make so much sense. At some point, these super mutants. Now, do you remember how earlier we mentioned men becoming robots and robots becoming men? Well, at some point, these super mutants somehow become toys. Like Toy Story, I'm talking about inanimate objects that can move when nobody's watching. So at some point, these super mutants become toys, and they go from noble crusaders to mischievous beings hidden in plain sight. And somehow, these toys become men again. So for when the super mutants exist, they exist for a cause to replace humanity, same as the robots replaced man. Men would replace humanity and robots in the form of super mutants. But at some point, they got bored, or they accomplished their goal, or for whatever reason, being a super mutant no longer appealed to them, so they chose to become mischievous toy people. Same as a robot, but without any kind of science or technology. It just is a living, inanimate object. But it's implied that it can animate itself when nobody's watching. So, at some point, these toys become men again. But when they're toys, they live for mischief and to mostly mischief. Not necessarily. So, when they're super mutants, they live for violence. But at some point, that gets old and they just exist purely for mischief. Kind of like gremlins or ghoulies. Just mischievous beings. Um, but at some point that gets old, so they decide to become men of God, but not necessarily God. They praise Mothman, so they become men of Mothman. They become the cultists in the far west, and at some point, those men who now live for a purpose when they once lived just for mischievous chaos as toys. They're now men who live for a purpose to serve. They become a unified people's army and factory men who now live for a purpose to serve at an even greater efficiency than the religious men. And then at some point, they're replaced by robots who can do the job better than they can. And at some point, those robots are replaced by raider men who no longer care about serving a purpose and no longer care about doing a job. All they want is revenge. And at some point, those raider men become super mutants who can do that better than them. And so now, since the point is chaos, those super mutants are outperformed by mischievous toys that can do the job better than super mutants. And then those mischievous toys abandon mischievousness and nefarious goals and become men who can serve a purpose. And so it's just this endless cycle where toy becomes man, but religious man, and then man becomes a form of communist, and then that man becomes a robot because robots can fit in to that kind of utopia better than mankind can. And then man decides to burn it all down, and then man becomes mutant, and mutant burns down those men. And then mutants decide to take it another level and become toys. And toys decide to become religious men. So, anyways, that's a little bit of storytelling from a little bit of visual storytelling, a little bit of storytelling based on the things I see in this game. That's just something I threw together. I don't know if it's accurate, and I haven't seen everything. So, like, for example, I have not killed enough ghouls to know where ghouls fit into the equation, but I'm sure they do fit in somewhere. Same with a lot of the creatures, such as Deathclaws. I'm sure they have a place in the story as well. I just have not figured it out because I have not gotten to that point yet. Same with the Scorched. So I'm still working on putting all the pieces together. But from what I've formulated, just from playing a little bit, it's that there seems to be this cycle where inanimate objects have a spirit, they have a soul, and they have a life, same as man and robot. It's just, in Fallout 76, it's a bit easier to accept that because they've decided to abandon the science fiction route and go more towards the mythos and legends. And one of the basic themes in mythos and legends is often spirituality. So, like, that's where Skyrim really shines, is they have that spirituality. And so with that side of the storytelling, it's easier to understand why toys with no circuitry or electronics or organic parts could have lives. So it's possible that instead of any kind of organic or organic systems or mechanic systems powering these toys, it could just be voodoo magic. But anyways, that's going to be all for this. So just a reminder, this is a charity stream, so if you get the chance, check out the links in the description and consider donating or just reading about how those organizations help out with the wildlife. And maybe you also could help out with the wildlife somehow, even if you can't donate. Maybe put out a water dish for some birds, or keep an eye out for any marine life in trouble. And that's going to be all for now. So hope you all had a good time hanging out here. Goodbye. Have a nice day, night, evening, afternoon, whatever you got going for you. Farewell.